Salut tout le monde, c'est moi, Johnny B. Bienvenue de nouveau au podcast Bien à vous, Concordia. I'm sitting here sporting mon jersey des Canadiens de Montréal, eating a delicious smoked meat sandwich, being serenaded by Montreal crooner Kurt Chaboyer, who is our featured musical guest this week, and that song was Won't You from his Damp Collar EP. And with me, as always, is mon acolyte, Anne-Marie Turcotte. Ça va, Anne-Marie?
Très bien, John.
Oh, parfait. Eh ben, in case you haven't figured it out, this week our episode is all about stories from Montreal, and we're calling this episode Schwartz or Maine, after the two iconic smoked meat shops on Saint-Laurent. Schwartz, the establishment smoked meat restaurant, the smoked meat of the bourgeoisie, directly across the street, competing with Maine's, the smoked meat of the people, beloved by Montreal icon of icons, Leonard Cohen. And all of these themes were touched on when we sat down with two PhD students in the Social and Cultural Analysis program here at Concordia, returning Best Concordia guest, Kris Murray, and new to the podcast this season, Guillaume Boily, who chatted with us about priests, Marxists, and factory workers in France, and just what that has to do with socialist movements in Quebec during the 1970s. Merci beaucoup, Anne-Marie.
Well, basically, it was on. It was a comparison of two groups. The first being French Marxist-Leninists. Marxist-Leninist intellectuals, actually, who decided to become factory workers for political purposes. So their intention was to organize the working class from the inside. So to do that, they felt that they needed to become factory workers themselves. And so that was in France in the 70s, but it also happened elsewhere in the Western world, and my thesis project will be about that phenomenon in Quebec. But I compared those French Marxist-Leninists with French priests who basically did the same thing. So they felt that Christianity was losing ground in France, so they felt that they needed to be close to the workers' lives in order to bring back the message of Christ in their lives, or something like that. So they became factory workers in order to know how workers lived and know why faith was losing ground, and spread the message of peace. And
was it at the same time?
Pretty much, actually. The worker priests came before. It started in the late 30s, but really grew in the 50s. But the peak of the movement was in the 70s, and the Marxist-Leninists were in the factories in the late 60s and throughout the 70s. So actually, they were there at the same time. And in some cases, they actually met each other and had a sort of, rivalry, but sometimes collaboration as well, because both groups were super involved in labor politics and union politics. So sometimes with different perspectives, but one of the crazy things is that in the end, instead of the priests preaching Christianity to the workers, the opposite sort of happened. The priests became Marxists, or even though often they were already sympathetic to some of the class struggle analysis of Marxism, or they were already pretty left-wing. Yeah. But a lot of them kind of put aside their religious...
The spiritual mission.
Yeah, the spiritual mission. Well, they don't really... They've set it aside a little, in the sense that they don't preach anymore. They don't want to make converts or anything, but they still feel that by being involved in union politics and trying to improve the workers' lives and their working conditions, they are doing the work of Christ, because they are making humanity better. Yeah. And creating better relationships between humans.
Right, because I was it would seem to me that some of these sort of social justice values of maybe Marxists and Leninists are kind of enshrined in a lot of Christian morality in some ways.
It's an old. A lot of people have have done this rapprochement between the two over the years, and have felt that there's a missionary aspect to Marxist to Marxist militancy, and that there's also a teleological aspect to Marxism or to any revolutionary ideals.
And are like using the term sort of like missionary, is that used to critique, or is that just sort of like it just has those qualities without making any sort of judgment about that? Because when I think of missionaries, like for me, the term missionary is like kind of a loaded term these days, where I'm like, I don't know if that's such a good thing. So like the people who are calling Marxists missionaries, they're saying that they have like a missionary quality. Is it a critique of that? Or?
Yeah, usually it comes from right-wing people who are trying to dismiss that kind of activism. Not always. But yeah, so personally, I tend to avoid that vocabulary, and I'm not sure it's that useful to compare the Marxists with Christians in that sense. But in my comp, I really focused on their day-to-day actions and what they did in practice in the factories, not on whether Marxism is a Christian ideology or whatever. I focused a lot more on like their the kind of relationships that they established with the other workers in their day-to-day life as factory workers.
And so, okay, well, I want to go back for one question. So do you think that the Marxists who kind of came after the priests would like, did those two things happen independently, or did one sort of come out of the other? Like if there'd been a foundation for like people deciding to sort of like promote their ideology by connecting to people in a factory, did the Marxists and Leninists, like, were they like, oh, those priests did that, so like let's go and try this out? Like,
actually they wanted to avoid the comparison with worker priests. The worker priest phenomenon was well known in France at the time, but Marxists felt that what they were doing was very different. Because they're not working towards the same goal and towards the same ideology. But I think we can say that both movements were influenced by the general atmosphere of France and of the Western world at the time, where working class issues were really put forward in the media, in political discourse. At the time, the French Communist Party was the strongest left-wing party in France. And it had 20% of the electorate at pretty much every election. Not always, it depended, but So working class politics were really front stage at the time. So a lot of people from different backgrounds felt that you had to be in contact with the working class in one way or another. So going to the factories and becoming a factory worker is one, let's say, a more extreme form of like trying to be in touch with the working class.
I wonder, Guillaume, how you can avoid a comparison between the priests and the Marxists, which both, like John mentioned, are colonizing in the way that they're both preaching an ideology that they want to impose or bring to people, and how you can avoid addressing that issue.
Well, I do talk about this issue in my comp paper, and well, the thing is that they don't see themselves as missionaries. They don't describe themselves as missionaries. Both use the expression serve the people or serve the working class. So they want to be in the service of the workers, and they do hope that that they will be able to share their beliefs. But at first, the thing is that Well, they started from different. They had different starting points. The Marxist-Leninists thought that the working class was inherently revolutionary, so they thought that revolutionary ideals were already massively present in the working class, and that all that was needed was a little help to make sure that these revolutionary ideals are expressed and take form and take a political form. And whereas at first the worker priests thought that faith was that the working class milieu were devoid of faith and there was a spiritual absence. But when they went into factories, they actually realized that there was a lot of working class solidarity. There was a form of community culture. People had strong bonds. And so they realized that there was no such thing as spiritual absence, and that they just had a different way, not necessarily Christian, but sometimes so, of expressing spirituality. And so they totally dropped the idea of being missionaries or converting people. And what they say is that just by being there and being with the workers as a worker and as a union delegate, they are already doing fulfilling part of the mission that they wanted to fulfill in the first place, even though it takes a form that is different from what they expected.
Right.
Whereas the Marxists often realize that the people they talk with were less revolutionary than they expected. Mm-hmm. But they still didn't they didn't really preach. They also set their ideology aside and focused a lot more on actions, either different sorts of direct actions, sabotages, stuff like that was supposed to provoke class struggle and amplify class struggle. Or a lot of them also became union delegates and did all sorts of political work to improve the workers' living conditions, and often they had the support of the approval of the other workers in doing that. They were elected. They were given the workers. A lot of workers gave them their trust to represent their interests as union delegates.
So, because you were talking about the relationships between the people who worked in the factories and the workers and the Marxist-Leninists, intellectuals, and the priests also. So those relationships, were they like hard won? Like, was it were there tensions between the groups when they came in? Because it sounds to me also like people brought their assumptions to the table in terms of what they expected, right? And maybe there might have been pushback. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, that was my expectation. My hypothesis was that there would be a major cultural clash between the two groups. In the end, that's not what I found. In the case of the worker priests, it's amazing how well they managed to blend in with the other workers pretty quickly as well. And they became fully appreciated members of the group that they were part of. In the case of the Marxists, they were often welcomed as comrades, colleagues, and there were some. Well, a lot of Marxist activists feared that they would experience cultural clashes, but in the end, it wasn't that present. And a lot of times, instead of clashes, they get indifference. People just don't care what your background is. Like now you're a worker like us.
Okay.
So
people were willing to accept people into the fold. Because what was the background of these Marxist intellectuals? Were they...
A lot of them were well, a good percentage of them were upper class, and they were in some of the most prestigious French universities. Not all of them. Some of them were from working class backgrounds and had some university education, and then went back to the
But they were fairly well integrated into.
Yeah, most of them, except that ideologically speaking, they never managed to really spread their ideas. But in some cases, they really contributed to strikes or other significant movements, political movements inside the factory, or to defend the rights of immigrant workers.
Thought I heard the angels sigh when I walked their loved streets at night.
And so, so you were looking at these two social movements for your comp, but then your PhD work is actually in the context of Quebec, right? Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the Quebec context?
Yeah, I mostly read on France up to now because nothing has been written on that phenomenon in Quebec, and except because there was also a very strong Marxist-Leninist movement in the 70s in Quebec, but and even on the movement as a whole, not much has been written. Only one academic book was written on the subject by my supervisor, which is why I'm with Jean-Philippe Warren.
Yeah, Dr. Warren. Nice.
Yeah. And but the general context, I'd say that in the 70s in Quebec, on the left, the Parti Québécois was the strongest force. But those people who did not recognize themselves in the Parti Québécois because they felt that it was too centrist, or they didn't really believe in the independence project, those people eventually, most of them became part of Marxist-Leninist groups, and these groups were not that big, but very influential because they were so involved and so focused. And I listened to an interview with one Marxist-Leninist activist, and he said that they were doing reading circles where they read all their Marxist classics, so Marx, Engels, Lenin, Mao.
Wow.
And
sitting in a circle reading.
Yeah, and he said that at first they did it 7 days a week, and then 2 years later they decided to take it more relaxed, so they dropped the Sundays.
Oh, nice!
So only 6 days a week,
a day of rest. Wow, that's insane!
Yeah.
Wow.
And they also had a lot of different chores, like handing out their journal, writing the journal, trying to organize people, and they also had to make a living, and they had jobs and everything. So yeah, it was just they were so involved to the point where a lot of people feel that they sort of became disconnected because it ate their whole life.
Right. And the groups were small, but were they kind of insular, or were they?
Yeah, and there was a lot. There were two main groups in Quebec, mostly in Montreal, even though they presented themselves as pan-Canadian groups, and they had some people in the rest of Canada as well. But so the biggest one had about 1,000 members.
Okay. In
no,
my head,
yeah,
I'm thinking
it's
20 people.
Yeah, no, it's
not.
No, it's actually pretty big when you.
Okay.
And the second biggest had 500 members or something.
Okay.
But it's always hard to know the numbers because and they had different levels of membership as well. So some people were only sympathizers, but they were still in the nebula. But others were full members,
core members, and periphery.
And they didn't really keep lists because they were afraid of repression, and
Right. Was that sort of a big threat at the time?
Well, yeah. In the left in general, the RCMP once raided the Parti Québécois headquarters to steal files on Parti Québécois activists, and of course, all of these people, all of these activists were really deeply affected by the October 70 crisis, when more than 400 people were arrested in the night, overnight. Artists, intellectuals, activists from unions, from political parties, all sorts of people, for absolutely no reason.
Because they were sort of under the excuse of being connected to the...
Yeah. Well, if you had a book by a FLQ member in your library, you might be arrested by the police for sympathy with terrorists.
Right. So in that kind of climate where you're you're under threat from the state or what have you, how did organizing happen back then?
Well, from what I read, when they were doing their meetings, they tried to do their meeting in a different place every time, which was sometimes hard to do because if you're one book I read recently was about the experience of a Marxist-Leninist activist in Valleyfield, which is a small but not so small city south of Montreal, and he talks about the fact that they were out of apartments to do their meetings, so they had to come back to the places that they were. But they really wanted, and they all had code names. Okay. So inside the organization, they only used their nickname and not their real name because they were afraid of police surveillance But then again, they were also powerful enough eventually to have a local in Valleyfield, and so they had a public side as well, and they participated in protests and everything. So.
Cool. And then, was it similar to the Marxist-Leninists in France in that they were also trying to connect with workers in that same way?
There was also a movement like that. Well, actually, one of the two organizations was in favor of sending people into factories, just like in France. The other wasn't, because they felt that the priority was to educate the workers, and but they still wanted to be in touch with the working class, and so they mostly handed out journals at the entrance of factories, and they participated in different strikes, and they also had a few people who became factory workers as well. Yeah. But one of the organizations really put that idea forward, and so again, it's very hard to talk about numbers, but from my supervisor was suggesting that there were about 100 or 150 people who Marxist activists who became factory workers for factory. Well, one major difference with France is that here a lot of them became hospital workers. Okay. Janitors and people like that in the hospital, whereas in France they really focused on the traditional big industries. Yeah,
like machine building.
Machines, shipbuilding, car factories, textile factories. Because when you read Marx's Capital, it's all about textile.
Yes, yes. The pin, the needle, isn't that the classic Marxist?
That's Adam Smith.
Oh, that's Adam Smith. Yes.
Marx does talk
not
about
my wheelhouse at all, but I do remember the pin. The pin.
Yeah. Division of labor allows you to do 88,000 pins in an hour,
that's what it is.
instead of 100 or something like that.
Yeah, it's how to make more pins.
Crazy number.
Division of labor. Yeah. I was a course I TA'd in my first year for BevFest, and that was I guess the takeaway from me as a TA, knowing not too much about that stuff, but Adam Smith. the man. So in Quebec, though, you're saying they were working, people in hospitals are doing sort of service industry jobs as opposed to factory jobs.
Well, they were doing both.
Both,
but yeah. So that's one difference, and that's one of the things that I'll investigate. Why did they? Why was there? Because I've from what I've read, the people in the U.S. who did the same were also focusing on heavy industry. Car factories in Detroit, coal mines in West Virginia. So heavy male-dominated industries. Whereas going to hospitals is a very, very different environment. It's it's gendered labor as well, right? Like
it's caregiving. It's all of that stuff.
I think one of the reasons why they did that here might be the 72 strike, because there was a major strike. It was the public sector Front Commun, the Common Front. So all the major unions in Quebec decided to strike to improve their working conditions at the same time. And so at the time it was the biggest strike that ever happened in the province. And so maybe the Marxists, since they had seen and probably as well participated in that strike, they might have felt that the public sector was also a revolutionary actor, whereas maybe in France and in the U.S. the public sector workers weren't as aggressive in their...
Or maybe even connected, like maybe just those industries, without something like a strike to galvanize people around an issue, maybe, because people never talk to each other about their, shared interests, that's all oftentimes that these things kind of, happen in isolation, like the cheese stands alone a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting, though. So, so that's why you think that might have occurred in Quebec.
One reason.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting thing to investigate, the difference why they chose the public sector. I feel it's
important.
Yeah. There's something there.
Yeah, absolutely. So were they successful? Were the Marxists, Leninists in Quebec successful?
Well, again, I haven't really started the research.
Okay.
On a large scale, I guess not. I mean, as far as I know, we're not living in a Marxist society.
No.
Sure.
Pretty sure, yeah.
But I guess I'll probably, when I really start doing the interviews and delving in the archives, I'll probably find examples of struggles in which they won some advantages for their they helped their coworkers win some advantages salary wise or in their working conditions.
And probably there's you're saying with in France too, that there's sort of reverberations of these things that kind of maybe not in they didn't transform the system that we're living under, but that there's probably little ways. And even in terms of people going on to becoming professors, or that they're
You're so
there are well-known figures who have been Marxist-Leninist activists. People like Françoise David, the former co-spokesperson of Québec Solidaire, or Gilles Duceppe, the former leader of Bloc Québécois.
Right.
They were both Marxist-Leninist activists.
And did they maybe abandon their mission, or they lost their youthful idealism? And
well, they both stayed left wing.
Yeah.
To some extent.
Yeah.
They became we could say they became social democrats rather than socialists or revolutionary Marxists or whatever, but they still kept some left wing ideals.
Yeah.
Faultless. Absolutely faultless. Now what are the judges going to say about that? There's the smile. Because she so rarely smiles.
all dressed up like just another couple on the subway, to disguise the blood running wild in our veins. 'Cause if the son of a dictator thinks we're late now, he got no idea how long he'll be waiting. Understand, it's not easy to be the man who wants to understand you. Neither is it easy being free. Unless I'm free for you. Gymnast of my dreams, let's not go to the beach. We were not meant to lay down in the sand. Till that mean man swings from a tree. We work on our routines. Dot above your lip, the way you swing your little hips around the bar. Put on your heels, put on your makeup, slip on your hot pants and we'll slip the guards. Understand that it's not easy to be the man who wants to understand you. Neither is it easy being free. Unless I'm free for you. Gymnast of my dreams makes it look easy. Nadia in command. When in last we see on state TV his vessel empty, we'll go dancing.
That was Nadia Comaneci by Kurt Chaboyer from his recent The Drone of Love album. Now, for those of you who don't know who Nadia Comaneci is, she is a Romanian Olympic gold medalist who was 14 years old during the 1976 Montreal Olympics when she became the first gymnast in the history of the Games to be awarded a perfect score of 10. And speaking of perfect tens, I had the chance to sit down with Kurt here in the studio and talk to him about his latest projects, his love of words, and the Concordia print class that he's been collaborating with. So what's your crisis, Kurt?
Well, okay, here's my crisis. So I teach... I teach. I have a private class. Sometimes I make money as an English teacher. So on Sunday, I was teaching one of the top fashion photographers in Montreal, and she told me straight out. She says, "Damn caller, your last album. It's. I don't really like the production." And she's not a. She says she's not a music expert. She's a photography expert, but she has the final say. And she said, "You're low voiced. It's so lovely. It's like." It's a bedroom voice, and it's so intimate. And she says, there's all these high keyboards. There's a particular song called Ball on the Beach. Now, she's about 40-something, another generation. She said, I want to hear something where your voice is like up front and there's lows. So I sent her the links to The Drone of Love. And then she got back to her and I left her place. And she got back to me and said, oh, my God, it's incredible. So, and there are two different projects. One is a funky, polished album, which I love. And the other is a book of poetry, which are also songs, which I have not yet produced and may not, because it's supposed to be a collaborative enterprise. In other words, these songs, the words are perfect. I've edited these pieces down to the last syllable, and the chords are there. And but I feel that these are songs that can be presented in different ways depending on who I collaborate with. So if you've heard the Drone of Love, there's one song called Man Needs Cave, and one is a produced version with a 3-piece horn section, 3 female background vocalists, and a great flashy, funky piece. And then there's another I did with a classical composer, with the classical guitar, cello, and upright bass. And there's 2 or 3 songs that have already been done in 2 completely different styles, different tempos, some slight changes, but no changes in the words. So the pieces exist, and they can be reinterpreted. So that's what this book is. It's actually a book.
Oh.
So when you, rather than selling plastic CDs, do you play CDs at home?
No.
Do you play CDs at home?
Crickets. I do not play CDs, no.
The other thing is, who reads books?
Well,
there's a bookstore in Saint Laurent. I took a photo of on Tuesday. It was raining. A used bookstore just north of Duluth, and on Saint Laurent, I forget what it's called, Monroe's or something. There were 2 Got Junk trucks parked outside, and 4 guys in Got Junk overalls throwing boxes of books in the back of this open truck. So it was raining. They got rained on. Just piles and piles of books, and they filled up 2 trucks with it from a used bookstore. So
sad story.
So there you go. That's two tactile media, and left in the rain. So, but a book is. So I think there's actually a novelty into having a book.
Yes.
At a concert and selling that, because this is more tactile, and you can open it and flip the pages than a classic CD. So rather than these songs exist. Yes.
Done this way? Okay.
Yeah. So rather than these songs exist, but they can be reproduced in a variety of ways online, I suppose, and posted online. So that's the goal of the Drone of Love. The Drone of Love, the title of the book.
But I'll just interject here. But you did make an album.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the end, you did.
None of the songs from the Funky album are in this book.
Yeah.
Purposely.
So you have 2 separate albums.
Yes.
Of completely different styles of music that you've now put out in the past couple of months.
Yes. And I've more to come. It's yeah. So I've got the Flashy Funky album, and that's a band I put together every couple of months to do a big show with a horn section and things like that. And then this I can do with a solo, or with 3 people, or classical musicians, or a kazoo and a didgeridoo.
So where can people find these albums now?
Online.
Online, yes.
So Dan Color is on iTunes.
Not on CD.
Yeah. No. No, I have not made CDs, and I don't. Okay, I'm going to make a decision now. No, I'm not going to make CDs. I may make vinyl.
It's still a tough call.
I may make vinyl. Yeah, I figure I'll make vinyl. I know you're supposed to send CDs to radio stations or something. That's what my label told me, but it's better for the planet not to make CDs. So, Damn Color is a crooner psych album produced by these a couple of guys from a band in Montreal called Elephant Stone. They just came back from touring Europe, and it's a super funky album. And that is available on Spotify, iTunes, and some other entities, I believe. You can just enter my name, Kurt Chaboyer, on Spotify, and you can listen to the album at no cost. Or Bandcamp, go to my Bandcamp campsite, and you can find the Drone of Love, the book, selections from the Drone of Love, played by different groups of musicians, and you can find Damp Color, the album, and purchase it there for. I think it's 320,000 pesos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. And how did you?
350.
350.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kill the lights when you leave.
So there are many Kurt Chaboyers.
Well, maybe the idea is that. Well, here's I like words. A lot of musicians I know, for example, they hate Leonard Cohen.
Yeah.
And I understand because his stuff is amazing if you're a word person, but if you're a groove and a melody person, he writes great melodies. But if you're a groove person who's grown up playing Neil Peart drum solos, he's slow and grooveless. But I'm a word person, so the words are important to me, and that's why that's the core. Interpreting them can be done in a variety of ways. And I should mention that a floor below, I've got a class at Concordia with it's called Intaglio Print 211, and they I gave an artist talk there 2 weeks ago, and they've been tasked with making prints. Each one is going to make a print from a different song in this book. That's their school project for the second half of the course. Okay. So at the end of this course, I'll have a folio of original prints interpreting a line or a whole song. So I took questions. They told me which lines they would like to do, sometimes just a couplet. And there'll actually be a vernissage downstairs at the Mouse Print Gallery on the 9th floor on November 29th, where I'll play.
Yeah.
And it's small. I can't get the horn section in there. But I'll play some songs, and there'll be for every song, there'll be a print.
Oh,
so there'll be a vernissage with this show. So, again, it's another form of collaboration.
Yeah.
And that was my talk to them, was about, that's the goal of their second half project, is how to collaborate with other artists and interpret.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So who did the artwork for your book?
Well, again, I work in the community, so I love collaborating. It's like there's a waitress at the little restaurant called Chez Jose on Duluth in my neighborhood, and they let me put up my concert posters whenever I have concerts. And I saw her do some sketches. She's not a trained artist, but I saw her do some wonderful sketches. So I said, "Hey, if I give you, $80, will you make a cover for my book?" And she did it brilliant. This is beautiful. It's a drone of love shaped like a heart, and a young couple, and then there's illustrations here where my guitar player is a very good artist. So I gave him a 6-pack of Pabst Blue Ribbon. And I said, give me 7 sketches to go with the poems. So it's all collaborating in the community with people I know. And, I love that aspect.
And that was was that kind of the thrust of your talk, was about collaboration? And did you have, advice for
I said, because I feel strongly about this. It took me a long time to learn to collaborate, I think everybody has to... you can be young and pig-headed and believe in your own ideas and write or paint or compose all alone in your room and think you're great. But until you find an audience. 2, find your voice by presenting that to an audience. And 3, start finding people who back you and support you, and taking their advice, collaborating. I think even as a person, you need to move forward in life and open yourself up to others, and your precious ideas, which I've I felt this way. You know, my ideas are very precious. I'll only show them to my girlfriend, right? But no, eventually you have to learn to stand up in the world and collaborate. You don't have to be a total dick like Lou Reed.
Shot it. What are you doing there?
Well, it's cool that you can because I tried that once and no one would collaborate with me. So you got to meet people. So it was I gave a talk at this print class, and that's what I said. Hey, you're going to have to interpret my stuff. If you don't like it, or I'm sure you'll find something you like, do it. Interpret any way you like. But the idea was use this as a jumping off point to take something of someone else, express yourself, but express their idea as well.
Yeah.
Or their idea filtered through your precious artist fingers.
Very cool.
Collaboration. Yes.
Take the promenade, step to the edge, dare to look over the side of the bed, straight from the center.
Last but not least, it's the return of our good friend and social and cultural analysis PhD student, Kris Murray, who last year spoke to us about his work around muralism and public art. And Kris is back to discuss his highlights from Montreal's Mural Festival, a summer festival here in the city celebrating urban art and culture. Kris spoke with us about the festival and the two huge Leonard Cohen murals that went up in the city over the summer. So what were some of the highlights this year at Mural Fest? Well, I saw there was a Leonard Cohen one that you posted. I remember seeing that.
Yeah, that was a fantastic
it's
mural.
Close to Concordia.
Mm-hmm. No, that's the second one going up. We can
yeah, because there's another one going up. Okay, well, let me hear your highlights from Mural Fest, and then we'll talk about the big.
So the big
Leonard
highlight
Cohen
from Mural
one.
Fest this year was that every year, for the last 4 years, I followed artists and do whatever I do. And typically, what I mean, do whatever I do, I don't get permission from the organizers. I know most of the local artists, so I just hang out with them.
Right.
And they give me permission to hang out with them, and that's perfectly fine. And like the organizers know who I am.
Yeah.
Have known who I am, so they give me some leeway. They've given me a lot of leeway, I gotta say, over the years, given certain scenarios or circumstances. But this year, I got an official pass, so I got to be an official photographer for them, right? So they gave me VIP pass to get to go wherever I want. Made it a hell of a lot easier to go around and just get my shots, but also to see the inner workings and to get a lot closer to the organizers. So as a highlight for me, it was great to finally get that close and have the opportunity to have discussions with the organizers, which then turned into some interviews, which allowed me to get a way better and stronger appreciation for the hard work that they do to make an event like that happen.
Yeah.
And also all the other people involved too, right?
Right.
So it took you 5 years to get there.
No, I could have. For the last couple of years, I've reached out and said, "Hey, I'd like to have a photography pass, and donate my time." But I do it within the last 10 days or the last week of the event starting, and they're like, it's a madhouse. They get and I just reach out through email instead of just contacting one of the organizers directly. I never did it appropriately, to get the pass in time, right? So, and I'm sure they would have been more than happy to give me a pass.
But I just find it interesting because some students will go do their field work and some will go for a few weeks or a few months, and then you see that when you let things go organically, it can take up to. For you, it took you 5 years, and you're very, a lot of people and very invested in that community, but it took you 5 years to get to that point.
Right, but this is also the interesting thing about your work, because your work is really now 15 years in the making, right?
Going on it, yeah.
So
super long
so this is one part of a really long project that you've been working on, this body of work that you've
going
amassed.
I don't know. It's taken me almost this long to. We can get into that after. Maybe realize where I think the future of my work is, particularly within this community, and even the field that I'm in at this moment. In terms of finding that meaningful position, or that position where you can do meaningful work. That realization where you're like, hey, wait a minute. also on one end, it's, oh wow, has this been what I've been researching the whole time but not even realized it because I'm so close to it, or I've been looking at other things and caught within the whole body of the way the field looks at it. Everybody in the field is talking about graffiti, street art, and maybe muralism at one point, because now it's become a very popular topic. But historically, graffiti and street art have been talked about in very specific ways. They talk about the object. There's a lot of ethnographic work which deals with writers and artists on the street, but most of the time we look at graffiti and street art or art, whatever, as an object. And we talk about it and what it's doing, how it's changing things, and how it enters a discourse, and how it is affecting, say, gentrification or whatever, how it is doing stuff. And I've been with these people for so long, and you realize it's all these people are around you. To me, they're the real, I won't say story, but that's where the work is with those people, with their lives. I think that I'd like to imagine I could tell their stories in certain ways, and like I said, do more meaningful work to make
this. And this is the meaningful work that you're referring to.
Yeah, but I'm getting lost here.
No, it's good. I think this is I'm really curious because it sounds like you've kind of had a bit of an evolution in the work and what it is that what you're looking at, what you're studying, what you're talking about. So I'm very curious to hear.
Yeah, we'll get there. But you were I lost track of the previous question.
I did ask you about your highlights of Mural Fest.
Highlights of Mural Fest, yeah. I know it's hard to. It's weird, but I guess like typical highlights, I guess you would expect to hear is like certain types of artists and certain types of events and stuff like that, but. I don't know. It wasn't, for me, it was a lot of confirmation this year, right? It was following a lot of the local artists I've been following for a while to sit back and see their hustle and their struggle about getting their walls done. And to follow them, so some of them had a lot of problems getting their walls done. A lot of arguments with property owners, problems with the equipment, problems with the Mural Fest organization, and not necessarily not making a knock at them. It's just, when you're running a big event, it becomes very difficult to make all your little moving parts go in unison, right? So,
was that particularly bad this year? Were people having
not necessarily. No, different than you would see at any other Mural Fest. There's always problems with lifts, always.
Right. Yeah.
And we'll get to the Leonard Cohen. That's what I was thinking.
Don't worry, it's all up here. It's like a steel trap, Kris.
Don't worry. So every year, at all these types of festivals, there's always problems at lifts. Always. All right? These lifts, if you're lucky, you get a new lift, and it's perfect working order, and no one else needs it, right? And there's no, there's no scheduling problems with it. But other times, people share lifts, right? And depends what kind of lift you get to. There's these medium to big scissor lifts that go up really high, which are the big square platform ones.
Yeah.
Then there's the bucket ones, right? And those are a lot more difficult to use, I think. They're a little bit more, I won't say malleable, but dexterous. You can get into certain areas and do stuff, but they jolt around a lot. They're kind of dangerous unless you got to be strapped in.
Yeah.
Never mind the wind issues and stuff like that too. When there was wind advisories, at which point Kevin Lito, who did the massive Leonard Cohen mural, and others weren't allowed to go up on their lifts for a day and stuff like that. And then, so that's if you get good lifts, and then there's other lifts that are just older than time, you know what I mean? And they're falling apart and rusting. The hydraulic systems aren't working. They just don't work well. They're rusted. You got to really beat the crap out of them to make them work. And then sometimes somebody else needs your lift, and when you need your lift to get your work done that night, and you're on a schedule to get your anyway. So there's always a lot of stress and anxiety that surrounds.
Yeah, sure.
Just the equipment alone.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And then you have property owners sometimes who don't like the work that you're doing, or don't like the fact that you're taking their parking spot, or weren't vetted. Vetted. What I mean by vetted is the discussion with the organizers wasn't very clear as to what everything was going on, and it's now disrupting the work flow or workspaces of these people or for their clients, and that falls onto the artist who's just at the wall and wants to get the work done, and arguments over and then after all of this, and after you finally get your not just the equipment and area, never mind whether the supplied paint is from the if you get paint from the festival, if it's good paint, and there's tons of gradations over whatever is good paint, whatever. I'm no expert on that, but I hear issues. You finally get everything done, and then like a day later, somebody comes and hits your wall, and crushes your wall. You know what I mean? Like
devastating.
So for me, I mean, part of my work is talking to the artist about this kind of stuff, right? The struggle and the hustle of getting it done.
Yeah.
So for me, there's a lot of confirmation to follow
for these guys. What's the time frame?
No, they got like 10 days.
Okay.
At max, 10 days.
It's not a lot of time.
Depends on your wall. Yeah, I mean, if you got a huge wall, you got to think about what you're putting up there, the detail. There's tons of stuff. I mean, like, you could have a wall that is 10 stories, or not 10 stories, it's like 5 stories high by 200 feet long or something. And you want to put up a certain image on there, and maybe it's just too detailed. Maybe it's too busy. Maybe it's not detailed enough. Maybe it's just a bunch of big blocky shapes, and you're not happy with it. Maybe you don't have enough materials. Maybe you've never done a big wall like this before. It's a huge challenge, which, by the way, Mural Fest gives a lot of people the opportunity to paint their big walls. That's a great thing, I think. But, sometimes you totally miss the mark, and you're like, oh, man, like, it's taking me a lot longer to prime this wall,
right?
Or to put my base colors on, or whatever, to get to that spot, or whatever, right? So a whole bunch of stuff there, whatever. But yeah, for me, it was a lot of confirmation. So hanging out with these artists, getting full access this time, not having to a lot of the years beforehand, because I haven't been an official photog or had a pass, just had a pass, like a wave at security and say let me through. I've had to figure out my own ways to get around, right? Climbing my rooftops, going through back alleys, whatever, sneaking my way into certain areas and getting stuff done, right? Which I'm totally fine on doing, but it was a lot easier this year to get stuff done.
I would imagine.
Hell of a lot easier.
Flash that pass.
Oh, you just flash the pass. You're just like, media, and they're like, oh, okay, whatever, man. Let me check the bag. No beers? Like, no, there's no beers in my bag. Yeah.
Sunday night.
Other highlight, great highlight, was definitely Kevin Leto's Leonard Cohen mural, so it is the single largest mural done by an individual artist in this city ever.
What?
Ever. Things like 13 industrial stories high.
Wow.
It's on a 13 industrial story building, maybe the first level, there's nothing there, but all the way back up, and it's huge. He did it alone.
For Mural Fest, or this is there's 2, right?
Yeah. Well, and okay, so we'll get to the second one in a minute.
So this is the first one.
So the first one is in the Plateau. It's just off into Pauline and Saint Dominique, and it's in the back alley behind Moishes, if you know that, on that big building there. And it's in Cohen's old neighborhood. It's where he lived. So it's a fantastic tribute to him. It's bigger than life. It's huge. Like I said, it's something in upwards of about 12 to 13 industrial stories. Kevin Leto is the artist, and it was, I believe it was put into effect through Mural Fest, right? So Landmark Mural Fest, those are the people who do Mural Fest. And if I can get it's the Federation, it's a Community Jewish Federation or Association, I can't remember the name of it. That's where the funding came from. They did it at a minimum funding. I'm talking the most minimum of all funding that you can do on a wall like this. Kevin, as far as I know, didn't, he took a huge cut in terms of any kind of payment or whatever remuneration. I mean, the guy spent 12-hour days for, must have been a few weeks. I mean, he just kept going. Like, it took him 4 or 5 days to trace everything out.
Yeah, because it's so detailed.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And he this is amazing. I got wicked pictures of him. So you know those painter sticks, those extender rods?
Yeah.
He extended out a rod, took a big jumbo marker, and just taped it to the thing, and was drawing on the wall out of this huge bucket crane, right?
Wow.
Huge bucket thing. It's the largest bucket crane thing I've seen ever used for muralism in this city, too. I mean, it's huge. At that point, the largest.
Okay.
What do you call? But yeah, he did it all alone. Took him a better part of about 3 weeks, I think. 12-hour days. The only times he wasn't was when I think he was exhausted, or when the wind advisories were like, look, you can't be that high in the bucket. You had to have an independent crane operator, total safety harness, helmet, everything. And it's a fantastic piece. I mean, it's at cost too. It's a wonderful. I think at that point I remember seeing it, and like the media surrounding it. The media storm was insane. It was crazy. It was all over. It was everywhere, all over social media and everything. It really, I think, at that point put Montreal closer to being on the map in terms of having these types of massive monumental walls like that, or that we have the architecture and space in our city to support that kind of, or at least, the space, never mind the infrastructure in terms of the monies and the municipal, whatever, that's something else, considering the new one going on. But like, it definitely would entreat more of this to happen. And then, you know what? Around midway through him doing that wall, midway through Mural Fest, news came up that Coder had greenlit another massive Leonard Cohen mural. This is the largest mural ever done in our city.
And bigger than the first one.
Oh, yeah, this
right?
one
like
is...
It's humongous.
It's
like full body.
It's a 24, 25-story building, right, on Crescent?
So the guy was midway through his huge mural and learned that somebody else would do a bigger one?
Oh, not just anybody else, too. Gene Pendon and Al Mack. These are amazing artists. I mean, Gene Pendon is old school artist and muralist, painter in the city. He's been in the community for years. He works with Moo. Moo is the organization that's behind the new big Leonard Cohen mural, just a stone's throw away from where we're at here.
Yeah.
So what was the reaction of the first muralist that was halfway through his mural?
Surprised and a little dismayed, because the amount of funding going to the new mural is 10 times as much as the funding that he got. And both, Mural Fest himself, or the people involved in the Plateau Leonard Cohen mural, were vying for the municipal contracts, I guess you can call it that. Because it's basically, you have to put in proposals to the city, and the city vets them and says, oh, okay, well, this is a great one. We greenlight this one. Here's some money for that. Here's some money for this, et cetera, right? There's funds for that. So it created some issues, definitely. They've all been worked out. I mean, all the artists involved on both the artists involved on both projects are totally cool with each other, as far as I know. There's no animosity or hate. But out of the general public, and perhaps out of the communities, like there's some. Yeah, there's definitely some concern, disdain. There's some hate, going on. There's just a $300,000 mural going on that Crescent Street. Okay, $300,000. 2/3 of which are coming, I believe, from the city. A third of which I don't know necessarily where the money's coming. I think a third of which is coming out of public money. I mean, look.
So that's always contentious.
Yeah, it's always contentious. For sure it is, particularly when it comes down to art. People look at it and you're like, how can that cost so much money? Right. No, these murals cost money, man.
Yeah.
Like, they cost a lot.
Yeah,
and never mind the amount, like I said, Kevin put in 12-hour plus days. He, slaved away on his wall hard, alone. He had a little bit of help maybe from his crane operator here and there.
Right.
But, I mean, very little.
Do you have an idea of the budget for the other one, the first one?
A tenth.
A tenth?
Roughly a tenth of what's
so it was
going on.
Oh my God.
Ish. And I'm talking about totally at cost. And the thing, too, is that both projects were going, I believe, I'm yet to maybe confirm all of this, but as far as I know, both projects were put in at the same time. And so that creates a bit of competition, right? And, competition's good, but when it comes down to, two murals depicting the same individual, right?
Is there room for
and I'm talking both of them are bigger. Both of them are bigger than life. You know what I mean? The first one is already so huge, you're really taken back.
Yeah.
And the second one is huger than life
Even
again, right?
bigger than life.
It's monstrous, but not in a negative. I don't mean it's
I
monstrosity.
just
mean it's
huge.
monstrous. It's huge. It really is truly monumental.
Yeah.
And I think that both these walls, and particularly this new one, it's 20 stories, definitely puts Montreal on the map in terms of monumental walls and artistry like that. And depending on the reception now from the public, and the community, I think it's definitely going to be telling in terms of where we're going to see projects like this in the future. whether or not we're going to see more money dedicated to these types of projects. Is it another? Coder has a real bad history of just throwing money at stuff, right? Whether it's to light up a bridge for like $60 million or something, or whatever it was for that, right? Or just to right?
It was beautiful.
Oh yeah, it is really nice. I think it's awesome. I
love it.
I've seen it at night. It's wonderful. It really is.
Yeah, and there's no question that these two murals are not amazing works of art.
Yeah,
like,
exactly,
they are gorgeous, Yeah. And Leonard Cohen, of course, is a Montreal icon. So, like, is there room for two? I think people here would think that there is.
It's a wonderful mural. Look, Gene, and Gene, by the way, again, like, so Gene Pendon, heavyweight crew. I mean, he's been doing walls in the city either alone or in conjunction with other artists and crews, with heavyweight, whatever, and others for years. Like, the guy's a staple.
Right.
And El Mac is like internationally known, for the work he does. He's an amazing artist. Both are awesome artists, and it sucks that because of all the negativity surrounding this, it falls onto them.
Yeah, for
these
sure.
guys, come on, these guys are deserving of so much accolades and credit for the work they're doing. And it's not like everything else they've ever done. We've all been like, well. Well, no. All of a sudden, now it becomes this thing, and they kind of get thrown under the bus. And I don't think they deserve to be thrown under the bus whatsoever. And it's very typical. I think we just said earlier that it's a lot easier for us to criticize other people than ourselves. And I think we have a bad habit of throwing these folks under the bus when we only have ourselves to blame for voting in somebody like, say, Coder, or for not being more vocal previous to other stuff. I think there definitely has been a lot of vocal dissent with regards to Coder's spending of money and stuff.
Yeah.
So will that be part of your PhD?
Yeah.
This story?
Oh, yeah, for
those
sure.
Two murals?
Yeah. The contentious issues, the tension, the monies, the artists, the monumental wall painting, the direction we're going.
There's so much history surrounding those murals that people will actually never learn or know about.
Yeah.
Well, you just come and see a beautiful mural, but you have no idea that there's another one or you see the other one, you don't know that the bigger one was started midway through the first one, so that's quite interesting, and it's stuff that
the production, which is what we've been talking about, is like
process of
the
production.
Process is like a whole other element to these.
There's a whole lot. There's lots of stuff going on in terms of the process, and just to say again, what I didn't get to finish up before was that graffiti muralism in the city. The history of it laid the groundwork for these types of big walls to be painted, for the relations, right? Writers at a very early, 15 plus years ago were building relationships with property owners and businesses and restaurants and, stores and whatever to paint on their walls, which started to engender an attitude and a culture, right, of this within our city. I mean, look, muralism has been in our city for quite some time.
Yeah.
It really has. I mean, I got mural maps that go back to the 1970s, right? I mean, and there's murals that are still from the 1970s up on our walls in the city.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. There's actually one right up to Quartier de Spectacle.
Oh, yeah?
If you walk up to Quartier de Spectacle in the middle, where those weird lights are?
Yeah.
And all the way to the top of the street, you go across the street, there's this tree in front of the wall, and there's a set of, like, a mouth and lips and whatever.
Okay.
That's 1974. There's 70... Between 72
and 76.
The tree obstructs the view now, but the very first photos had this little baby sapling tree in front of it, and you can see like how it's grown, right? Like how much time it's been there.
Yeah.
And so the city has a very long history of muralism for sure, and relations between property owners, municipalities, and artists, whatever. But in terms of the new wave of muralism, the popularity of it, the aesthetics of it and everything. I mean, the graffiti, mostly I'd say graffiti and then in the street art, had a huge effect or had a huge part in playing and building this kind of culture and relationships that have given way to us, the communities or society being a lot more open to these types of things, and the money's even being involved, right? Up until recently, maybe with this huge, this huge wall. But the bigger you get, the more money it's going to be. I mean, don't matter. I mean, but at the same time, I think that's something that Kevin showed was that you can still get amazing work done at cost.
Right. Well, folks, c'est tout pour cette semaine. Un gros merci to our guests this week, Guillaume Boily and Kris Murray. big love to our friend Kurt Chaboyer for the beautiful music this week. And make sure you head down to Mouseprint Gallery on November 29th at 1515 St. Catherine West to check out Kurt's collaboration with the Intaglio print class. Also, you can follow Kurt Chaboyer Musique on Facebook and listen to his 2 EPs, Damp Collar and The Drone of Love, at kurtchaboyer.bandcamp.com. This week's episode was produced by Anne-Marie Turcotte, Juan Pablo Neri, Pauline Hoebanx, Kris Millett, and Adam Van Sertima. Special thanks to the Speculative Life Research Cluster, the Melian Institute, and the Concordia Ethnography Lab. We love you. I'm Johnny B, and until next time, best Concordia.
You know?
Look who the